Did you know you can make sauerkraut at home with no special equipment and 2 ingredients, cabbage and salt? Super simple. You can make a large amount, like a gallon, but I'm gonna show you how you can also make just 1 quart so you can enjoy it as long as you want, and it's super easy. So let's make some. This is all about sauerkraut, and I don't mean canned sauerkraut. What I mean is actual fermented sauerkraut, where the flavor of the sourness in the cabbage comes directly from the cabbage and from it fermenting in our kitchens, on our countertops, wherever it is. Now, I grew up with a history of sauerkraut and making sauerkraut. And back then, my great-grandma would actually do it where she would pack it into jars with a zinc lid. That's an old type of canning jar. Not can it, but put that lid on and then just put it in the basement and let it ferment in the basement. Sometimes the lids would blow off. It was a different way of doing it. Some other times growing up, what we would do is do it in big crocks, and I still will do this while I make a large amount. And it really is a simple process, not as scary as it sounds. You don't have to go through pressure canning it, you don't have to go through water bath canning it, because this is kept in the fridge once it's done and kept at that state where you like it. Meaning once it gets to the flavor you like, once it's fermented where you want it, you put it in the fridge. And what we're doing today is making a small amount, which maybe to some of you this isn't a small amount, but this is a quart jar. We're gonna make a quart jar of sauerkraut. Last time I made it, I made a gallon jar. So obviously this is a smaller amount that you can then just keep in the fridge. You could eat on all winter long, however often you make, or you can make a lot of this, more of it, if you wanna have multiple amounts. The reason I'm doing the fridge once it's done, first it's gonna sit out so it ferments, is because it makes it more simple. And I want this to be simple for people because I love fermented food. I love real fermented food, meaning fermenting it like this, making a real pickle is the same way. You ferment it, lacto-fermentation. So what we're doing is starting with cabbage. I still have lots of garden cabbage. I've kept it in the fridge so I could get my sauerkraut made because I don't always get it done. This is a beautiful, massive head of cabbage. This was close to 8 pounds, which we do not need for this. So what I'm gonna start by doing is breaking it down into smaller pieces or smaller workable amounts. So I'm gonna get my knife straight down through it, which, look at that gorgeous cabbage. Oh my word, I can't get over how beautiful cabbage is. Now, I do like to save some of these big ribbed leaves so I can use them to make sure my cabbage is staying underneath the liquid we're gonna create. That's really important because it helps it stay under the liquid, which is safety. So I'm gonna save a couple, or just one of those here on the side, and I'm gonna break this down even further so it's easier for me to chop. Now, you can use, if you want to, a good sharp knife and slice it really thin. The size of it doesn't necessarily matter as much. There are people that will pickle almost whole heads of cabbage or ferment them. But what I like to do is use a shredder, kind of like a mandolin. It's an older tool. And what I like about it, it's called a kraut cutter. It's honestly what it is. I also use this when I make slaw. But what it does is you take it across those blades and it makes a nice thin slice of the cabbage, which I want to show you. Now, this is a personal preference. The size of the slice does not matter, but you see how thin this is? That's what I like for my cabbage. I like thin slices. So in all honesty, I should really just start making these because I go to garage sales to find them and I really like them. I don't think there's a huge market of them for people that are making kraut, but here we are. So what I'm gonna do is keep shredding this. We're working with a small amount here, and then I'll show you the process. And once it's shredded, you can just move on. Now, you're gonna see down in here, some of these pieces, like see this? That's fine, you can keep that in there. You can also remove it if you don't like it, but the size isn't as important, but I just like how a kraut cutter gets it to me to the right size. So we're starting with 2 things. Organic cabbage to me is super important. It's important for me to eat organic whenever I can, just because it's healthier, better for us. But also in this case, we want nothing on anything we're using to inhibit the fermentation process. And chemicals can do that. So think what they do to our body. So as I'm doing this, what I want now is salt. And I'm using kosher salt, but more importantly, I'm using a salt that has nothing added to it. So table salt, the problem is it can have iodine in it, which can sometimes inhibit or make it cloudy. So I like to use a salt that has nothing. You can use canning salt too, but know it measures differently. This is like a sea salt size, which you can use sea salt too. And I'm adding my salt, and it looks like a decent amount, but this is the only thing we're doing. We're adding salt, and that is it. So what I'm doing to this is getting my salt on there, and what I wanna start doing, because this is what salt does, it breaks things down. So I'm gonna start going in here and just massaging that salt around. I don't even have to go too hard before it starts looking just a little wet. That's how quickly salt will work with it. And I'll start just squeezing it lightly, nothing too strong, But what instantly you're gonna notice is the volume of this is going dramatically down. But also what's happening is that salt is gonna start pulling out the water from the cabbage. You can see how easily and quickly this starts doing this. Now, what I want you to notice is, yes, the volume's coming down, but also the whole point is this moisture we're pulling out. That's gonna be our liquid needed to cover the cabbage, which in essence seals it in, keeps it safely within that salt solution, which helps it not spoil, but instead ferment, and creates a beautiful process of that fermentation of the good bacteria. You know, sauerkraut is used for a lot of reasons, but what I wanna show you here is, when I'm taking this up and squeezing it, look at that. I mean, this sounds gross, and you're probably thinking like, Caleb, this is completely gross. It's not, it's beautiful. I love the process of making something good, delicious, I love it, but also healthy. This is creating something super healthy for you, for your gut. It helps in digestion, but you know what else? Traditionally, we think of sauerkraut as eaten with certain foods, bratwurst, heavy roasts, heavy meats. Do you know why we do that? Without realizing it, that helps you digest that food better. So when you incorporate it into foods like that, there's a reason we eat certain things together. That's one of the reasons. So look at all that beautiful liquid now that's coming off. That's super important. And that's what we need to get to, that point of it doing this to know we can start packing it into a jar. So you could let it sit there if you want to too, but massaging it just quickens that process. So now we're gonna start packing it. That's how simple it is. So if we come over here, we can just start taking this, which you can see looks wet. We're gonna start putting it in this jar. Now I'm using a wide mouth jar because look, I have big hands and it fits in. You can use a narrow mouth if you want to. You can use another type of jar. I mean, the important thing is just having a vessel it fits in. And we're not gonna let this sit in direct sunlight just because that can heat it up quicker, that can cause it to kind of go off. Instead, what we'll do is put it either under the counter. If you have a basement, you can put it down there. Heat, cold, even the time of year, that affects how quickly this will ferment and get to the flavor you want. So you actually start checking it after a couple days just to see, because everyone likes a different sourness on it too. So what you're noticing is, as I'm packing it, you notice what I'm doing? I'm pushing to see where that liquid is. And look, without adding any water, that liquid is coming out of the cabbage. I think the process of that is just so exciting to think we have the power to create really good, healthy food. So what you can see I'm doing, and I'm not gonna fill it quite all the way to the top. This is about as full as I wanna get it. Because if you go all the way to the top, it's too much, and it will sometimes not have the right amount of gas that can escape, things like that. So I like to leave a little bit of room. And this is, again, just a quart jar. So you can just buy a quart jar if you don't have one. And now look here, I'm pressing it to make sure. See that? See that beautiful liquid? Because now the important part is just making sure the sauerkraut itself, or the cabbage itself, is not quite sauerkraut yet, is gonna stay under that liquid. So to do that, you can buy weights, you can buy springs that keep it under, but you know, I want this to be simple and something you can just do at home without buying all the equipment or anything extra. So what I'm gonna do is take, remember I said I wanna save these big ribs from some of the outer leaves? This is when I save them, and sometimes it depends how they fit. We'll cut it just slightly. This is what I use to make sure it stays underneath there. So I fold it just enough that we can get it down in this jar. And this we're gonna cram against the sides, and this is acting as my weight. So if you look at that. We're staying underneath the liquid. So this is the beginning of sauerkraut. Now the important part. It's gonna be a quick few blurbs here for you to make sure you hear. You wanna make sure this continues to stay underneath the liquid. If it doesn't, that means you didn't massage it enough, or you just need to let it sit until there's enough liquid. Next, you do want a lid. Now you can buy special equipment that will have a lid that allows the gas to escape, things like that. What I do is, I put this on, and about every day, or more, I will remove this to make sure it can escape. Because if you don't do that, and you let it go 4 or 5 days, I'm speaking from experience, I will undo this, and it about like blows back, even on a small jar like this, and then it bubbles out all that liquid. You don't wanna do that. To be safe, when you open this up, you could put it in a bowl, but I just every day will unscrew it, allow some of the excess air, and then put it back together. Now what you'll notice is after a day or two, you'll start seeing some bubbles come up. That's good. That's the fermentation beginning. And then I start checking it around 2 or 3 days, because some people like just a light sauerkraut flavor. That's fine, you can stop whenever you want to. Oftentimes though, when it gets cooler even, I'll let it go 7 days to get to the right flavor that I like. So I'm gonna check in, you're gonna check in with me until this is done so you can see the process along the way. And soon we're gonna have some sauerkraut. So we've sat now for, it's actually been close to a week. And this all depends on the flavor you want from it. So what you could notice, and each time it can be different depending on the weather, the time of year, you'll sometimes see little bubbles form inside of it, and they'll start working their way up. That's a good sign, you don't have to worry about it. But one thing I think I want to make sure I drive home here is, start checking it. Now, obviously, if you hate sauerkraut, this is not the video for you. This is not something you're gonna make, that's fine. But for those that like sauerkraut, you probably know the flavor you like. So after, maybe 3 days, that's when I start going in, peeling it back, and you actually start taking some. So you can see it doesn't change too much other than it starts looking like sauerkraut. It almost looks like a cooked cabbage, but it has not been cooked at all. It has just been sitting in that preserving, beautiful salt solution. But now what I'm gonna do is just taste it, which I've done already. Notice, it has a beautiful crunch still. It is crisp. This one's actually really good. It has, to me, the perfect sour or sauerkraut flavor. And what that means is it has sat now, I think it's exactly at 6 days I'm at right now, which usually I find for me between 5 and 7, sometimes 8 days is my like sweet spot of what I like. This is the perfect flavor. So what do we do now? Well, we don't just let it sit out forever. This is the point where I then just put it in the fridge. And that really slows down and almost stops that fermentation process, and it can stay in the fridge for months. And you can use it as needed. Use a clean utensil every time you take it out. Don't just eat out of the jar. But you can see I sometimes will make it in big gallon jars. Now this one I did put some carrot in. You can start testing things. A carrot can kind of slightly sweeten it sometimes depending on your cabbage. It's all just for what you want. You could add juniper berries, you could add peppercorns, you could add caraway seed to get more of that traditional. And then I will keep this in a fridge and I will pull out amounts and keep them in my indoor fridge. You can eat it just like this. You can use it in recipes for sauerkraut. Cooking it can take away some of the lactobacteria that's really good for you. It can take away some of those benefits, but it's still really good. And it's good to use just as a sauerkraut, maybe with your broths, with whatever you want. But it actually, to me, has much more flavor and a lot better texture than what you buy at a grocery store. So this is sauerkraut, which is really more of a process, I would say, than a recipe. I do have the ratios and amounts on there that I use and I like to start with, especially for just a quart-sized jar, which I think is a great size to start with. Because maybe you don't eat a lot of it. Maybe you just want to dabble with it and then see what you might use it on. I like to use it on salads. I like to use it as an accompaniment for something I'm doing. Obviously, I like it a lot. And this can sit in the fridge all winter long and I can be taking portions out of it as needed and use it, whether it's in recipes or just fresh, or if you want it for health benefits and just to eat it as is. Really good for your gut, good gut bacteria. So that's what I hope you take away from this video, is that we can ferment at home and it doesn't have to be scary. You don't have to have all those fancy tools and things to use. You can get those. You can get weights. You can get springs that will hold it down with special contraptions that will allow that gas to escape, but you can also just do it in a jar, especially to start with, and see how into it you want to get. So share this video around so other people can see maybe that if I can do this, anybody can do this. You don't have to grow your own cabbage. You can use whatever cabbage you can find, and you can make sauerkraut, you can make something fermented. And also I hope this answers the question of so many of you that have been asking when I share about this in stories, how it's actually made. This is the process, this is what you get. So of course, check my website, wyseguy.com, for the full description, a full post about this, and the recipe, the actual instructions that I'm using to do this. And until next time, get something exciting, try something new, maybe try sauerkraut. You might just get addicted.